Yeah, I can see why they've done it. Eddie Jones will get a reaction. He is a big name in Australian sport. He cuts through the media that is such a big player in the Australian sports market. Australian rugby desperately trying to sell themselves to be still a relevant player in the sporting landscape. But there's a big issue here. And it's the fact that they're trying to make it out as it's a coach problem. I'm sorry, Australian rugby, but take a look at what you've got. For the last, I'm going to say 5 years, you have had the poorest and lacking of depth squad and players, and not just Wallabies, Super Rugby as well, that you've ever had, certainly in my lifetime. And I'm going to be pretty keen on finding out from David Campese if he's seen a poorer group. Because, quite frankly, you don't have the cattle. Of the current regime, Koroibete, an informed hooper at the peak of his powers, and Karevi would be the only ones who would warrant a selection mention in the last 40 years of an Australian touring squad, I'm saying. Koroibete probably wouldn't get a start, and there's been better flankers than Hooper. But Hooper would certainly get a consideration for a touring squad of any of the generations that have been, certainly in my lifetime. But apparently that's not the issue. It's the coaching issue. It just doesn't wash with me. As I said, I get why you've gone the Eddie Jones route, but why now? I don't think he's going to be your magic bullet to produce your next Larkham in 8 months' time, or your next Joe Roff, or your next Sterling Mortlock, or your next George Gregan for that matter, or your next anyone. Simply, Australian rugby's cattle is pretty depleted. Talking to a couple of the Aussie greats at the Japan World Cup, when it had all gone tits up for Aussie again, and they're like, oh, there's a bit of talk around, we're going to get Rennie. I said, you've got to get Rennie. I said, it's your only hope. And sure enough, I don't think it was on my recommendation, but a couple of months later, it was well known that he had the job. And then, as you say, they've turned on him. And I mean, you go over the history of Kiwi coaches over there. If you're a Kiwi coach who has a career in front of him, you wouldn't go anywhere near Australia.
So I was terrified that Razor was going to end up there.
Yeah, well, exactly. And when you look at it, Robbie Deans went there as the most successful Super Rugby coach, highly respected, had already had times in the All Blacks, and if it wasn't for that semi-final against Australia with Mitch, then they would have probably been rolled over another campaign. That didn't happen, so Robbie goes and be successful again for Crusaders, then takes the Aussie job. He lasts a few years, and then the political beasts within Australian rugby get rid of him. Again, by that stage, the cattle it's not at its lowest, but it's starting to wane. Rob Penny is an interesting one for me. Rob Penny, I've never been coached by him, met him a fair few times socially and around the traps. Lovely guy, but his record would be without peer in NPC land here. Widely probably thought of as New Zealand's best coach never to be given a New Zealand Super Rugby job. Mm-hmm. He goes over there to a Waratahs team that is an absolute rebel and have players that you wouldn't want in your local club team playing out here for Ponsonby. And he gets the political archer. And, again, I think Kiwis are an easy hit there in Australia. Then they go and get Dave Rennie, who, as I've said, in my opinion, counts for nothing. But my opinion, he's the best I've had, and I've had some decent ones. And he clearly has been done over again. They're not actually prepared to confront their own issues. The hierarchy, why aren't you producing a Larkham anymore? Why isn't there no Sterling Mortlocks coming through, a Joe Roff, a George Gregan? You've got to look at your pathways. I always thought, the All Blacks this year, yep, we haven't had a great year, but never once did you think, we just don't have the players anymore.
No, that wasn't the issue.
That was never the issue. Because you looked at these guys individually and know that if it all clicks, that's why I've got money on them to win the World Cup, because I was that confident looking at this group. They're still, in my opinion, when they get going, they'll be as good as anyone in the world. If you've looked at Australia over the last 7 years, the fact that they stand on a corner and yell out, can anyone play 10 for our Wallabies this week? And they keep having to go back to your Quade Coopers and Bernard Foley's, great players in their time, but they haven't had a first five of their own making for a long, long time.
Yeah, there's different issues there. There's the first five situation. There's the health issue that they have been crippled by injuries for the better part of 18 months.
Yep.
But remember only 3 months ago, so they've got the World Cup after
the States.
Yep. After the States. And they want it to be like the homecoming of rugby in Australia, like rugby's coming home.
Yeah.
And they want to invest, they want to poach NRL players, they want to try and reprogram those pathways. But you can't help but feel the horse is bolted.
Oh, exactly. And I'd go back as far to say probably 2017. Couple of years, those last couple of years of Cheika's career, like that 2019 World Cup was a shambles.
Yeah.
Like an absolute shambles. So, I mean, it's all good and well. I know they've got that very brash CEO now, and he's looking to keep Australian rugby relevant. But what are you doing to actually produce decent footballers? Like they cry a river that they lost Angus Crichton.
Or Sawali.
Seriously, put Angus Crichton in a rugby jersey. Is he really going to be the difference between where your Wallabies sit right now? He would be a hard-running 12.